Hello and welcome. My name is Kevin Dolan. I'm the writer and author of Little Fag, a journey of self-acceptance and healing. And today I'll read chapter 7, My Need to be Needed, beginning on page 43 of my book. To this day, I love the smell of bread baking. It has a way of grounding me, and I remember the intensity I felt as a little boy watching Mom make it. That smell said Mom was looking out for us. That smell said Mom was looking out for me. We never had chores. Mom never demanded her children wash dishes, make beds, or clean the house. I always felt that it was strange that other kids in the neighborhood couldn't play because they had to clean their rooms. Mom did it all. She never taught any of us how to make a bed, fold a towel, iron a shirt, or wash out the tub. I spied on Mom as she did the work. It's how I learned. She was methodical. Her movements were seamless. The only breath she would take was a drag on a cigarette. She loved the cleanliness of our little wartime house. I always felt her pride in how the house appeared, and I'd hear her women friends, over coffee in the kitchen, tell her how clean and tidy the place was. As Mom made bread one day, I asked her if I could punch down the dough after it had risen. She snapped at me. That's no one's job but mine. It's my way of getting even. I'd watch her grit her teeth, clench her fists, and begin to pummel the bread dough. What I couldn't make out were her murmurs as she delivered each punch. I was sure there was a name connected to each blow. There was never enough food at home when we were kids, but knowing Mom was baking bread was deeply reassuring. The dough punching was always a little frightening to watch, though. I had this fantasy of being a housewife. I really loved how and why Mom did what she did. It would be a fantasy I'd keep to myself after overhearing one of my older brothers make this declaration to a friend. There was no way I was going to clean up that mess. What did she think I was? Some kind of faggoty housewife? Why did Mom teach you how to make bread and not us? Exclaimed both of my younger sisters. She didn't, I barked back. I learned by watching her. It wouldn't be until adulthood that I'd figured out why Mom never insisted we do any work around the house. It was her way of staying needed. She was the master at creating dependency. What I braved. His name was David, and he channeled a spiritual entity called Luke. I went to see David, a spiritual medium, so I could better understand myself and my family. He asked me to bring along 3 pictures of people important to me. One of them was my grandma, my dad's mom. Partway through our 75-minute session, Luke welcomed what he called an elderly woman into our space. Luke said this woman has been praying for me for my lifetime. She then asked Luke, please ask Tommy if he remembers seeing me through the screen door. I felt a chill run through my body. My parents spent 33 years hating one another. They called it marriage. Their kids called it war. When Dad was finally barred from returning to the family house by a restraining order when I was in grade 7, Mom told us he was the bad guy and we were never to see him nor any of his family. I never believed he was entirely the bad guy. Somehow, I knew Mom contributed to the demise of their love, but I had no idea how. Dad's contribution was very evident. It was alcoholism, anger, and violence. He was a wife beater. On a few occasions, I would sneak to see my grandma despite my mom's orders. One day, after a nasty slide off the playground teeter-totter, she helped remove a sliver from my bum. With my naked little butt still undraped on the kitchen table, she gently whispered against my ear in her gorgeous Scottish brogue, "You're special," which I had interpreted later in my adult years as her knowing I was gay. One day I knocked and knocked on Grandma's front door. It took a long time for her to answer. I could see her through the screen door, and then she said to me, "I'm sorry, dear, I can't see you today." With that, she disappeared into her living room. I was devastated. I turned back to Luke and said, "That's my grandma," as I started to cry. That image of seeing her through the screen door, hearing her loving voice, has never left me. Luke gently grasped my arm and shared, "Your grandma wants you to know she'll continue praying for you and loves you very much." I turned, my eyes overflowing with tears, and began to say, "Please tell her." Luke interrupted and gently said, "She's gone." My grandmother adored me. We had a special connection. I don't think she knew the specifics of the suffering her grandchildren went through, but I always knew she was aware of my heartache. What I braved most as a little boy, growing up in the chaos of my family, was being discovered. My gentleness remained intact. I was polite, I was kind, I was neat, my hair was always groomed, and my shoes shined. Despite all the invitations not to be who I was, I can now see that at least one person knew I was gay, and she spent her life and beyond praying for me. The unlearning. The psychologist leading this meeting turned to me and said, "Tom, what do you think the problems are at home?" I could feel the steely gaze of my mother as I attempted to breathe. I believe I was just a teenager and still have no idea what I was doing sitting in on Mom's counseling sessions with one of the social workers assigned to the Dolan file. Stranger still, it was while she was a patient at Calgary's Foothills Hospital. I have no memory of any of that interaction, but can still feel the fear, confusion, and shame as if it was alive in my cells today. Growing up, I always witnessed a struggle by my older siblings as they attempted to have independent lives. I'm sure if I asked their many ex-girlfriends or ex-wives, all of them would tell me that my brothers had no idea how to make room for them as a bigger priority than their mom. My mother leaned on all her kids in some pretty strong ways, and much of it felt very unhealthy. I remember while celebrating New Year's Eve with university friends, slipping away to call my mom at midnight. When a girlfriend asked where I'd been, and after telling her, she said, "I thought you might be more interested in kissing me at midnight more than your mom." I was devastated and shamed. My best friend in high school always invited me to spend Christmas Eve with his family. It was a Ukrainian tradition that Christmas Eve's meal not include meat or dairy. As someone not at all fond of meat, it was a feast for me. My friend's mom was an exquisite chef and an amazing human being. She passed away, and the following Christmas Eve would be my friend's and his family's first Christmas without her. It felt imperative to be there in support of his loss and in honor of her life. Christmas Eve for the Dolans, presided over by Mom, was loaded with tension. Who would get drunk? How much secondhand smoke could I endure? And would anyone have a conversation without the television blaring in the background? It was not an evening I relished, but Mom made it clear that attendance was mandatory. On that Christmas Eve, supporting my friend and his family without the presence of his mom was vital for me. My friend's dad did a beautiful job in preparing everything his wife had served up the year before. It was a moving Christmas Eve tribute to her, and one in this lifetime I will always remember. I thought I did well to get home just 15 minutes past midnight, only to hear my mom say, as I opened the door, "I hate you. You missed Christmas Eve." Clearly, Christmas was ruined. I have many other examples of how it felt like Mom treated me more like her husband than her son. All the money I earned working one full-time and 2 part-time jobs one summer went to feeding my siblings and paying for $500 electricity bills under the threat of our power being cut off. And yet Mom always had new clothes. None of what went on felt normal, and there certainly was no room for conversation. My young life was ruled by guilt and shame. Fresh out of high school and deeply in love with a friend, him not being gay, Mom completely devastated my relationship with him. In a desire to stay connected once high school was over, I continued to share as much of my life with him and his girlfriend as I could. The three of us were inseparable. While preparing to meet him one night, as I descended to the basement to get ready to go to a movie, I overheard a muffled comment from my mom. I turned, walked back up the stairs, and as politely as I could, said, Sorry, Mom, I didn't hear what you said. What was that? The moment the words fell out of my mouth, I felt terror twinge in my stomach. Everyone knows about him. You might want to be careful. With that, she turned and walked away. Paralyzed, not breathing, shamed, devastated. I couldn't believe what she just said. After what felt like an eternity, I walked back down the stairs. I opened my bedroom door and sat on my bed. My friend and I had laid there many sleepless nights talking about life. I adored our time together. Suddenly it dawned on me what my mom was implying. In that quip of a comment, Mom was telling me my friend was gay. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was me who was gay, and not out. My head felt like it was going to explode, and all I can remember thinking, between bouts of terror, is that my mom knows I'm gay. Moments later, I called my friend and told a lie about why I couldn't meet him. It would be, in that moment, how our friendship would end. Mom got exactly what she wanted, me all to herself. We never talked about what happened. We never talked about me being gay. Forcing me to play the role of surrogate husband and father was a heavy burden. I was left with no coping skills and no way to know how to deal with life experiences that would come my way. I was left feeling hopeless and helpless. My self-esteem was never augmented. All I lived with was the constant feeling of futility. The unlearning for me in my relationship with Mom and my siblings was to unbecome being the surrogate husband and dad. I was so embarrassed when one of my brothers gave me a Father's Day card. The level of parent-child sibling enmeshment fostered devastatingly unhealthy codependency. I was trained so well to anticipate the needs of my mom and siblings, all the while being completely unaware and having no one to intervene on my behalf. I carried this trait into my adult relationships. I didn't stand a chance. I'm trying to remember the book that I discovered. The title is Healing the Shame That Binds You. John somebody is the author. I'm not sure who recommended it, but when I read this book, and I remember cracking it open on a bus ride somewhere in Calgary, and I started to cry because the book essentially outlined my life. It really taught me, and even in the opening pages, that I never stood a chance. Shame was so prevalent in my family. It was used by my mom to control, and ultimately she had done a brilliant job. There are so many instances that I can remember that I felt shame. And that in feeling shame, having it dropped by my mom, it was so unfair. And yet in my work of forgiveness for myself and ultimately forgiveness for my mom, the only way I could see and have some compassion and empathy for my mom was to imagine her as a little girl, a 7-year-old little girl. I have no idea what her life was like. But from that vantage point, it allowed me to actually get a sense of her own humanity. It allowed me to take the woman off a pedestal I called Mom, or my mother, and saw her more as Dorothy, the person. And then realized that that little 7-year-old must have gone through some things that were similar to what I went through as a little boy. It didn't dismiss, nor am I making excuses for what she did in her relationship with her children. No, not at all. But it allowed me to create some humanity for my mother. And it allowed me to actually let go of some things that I would continue to blame her for, being a victim, of course, and not being able to move forward in my own healing process. So although shame was mammoth in my experience growing up, once I knew what it was, once I finished this book, once I got a better sense of what it was intellectually and how it is that it landed in my body, and most of the time when I begin to feel some kind of sensation in my chest, it usually is connected to an ensuing feeling of shame or being shamed. And I'm pretty good at stopping it. If it does land, I'm pretty good at sitting with it until it does leave, and then I can get a better understanding of what it was about. So for me, that dynamic of shame in my family was really challenging. But what I am grateful for is that now it doesn't have me. I can begin to feel it before. I can begin to feel a shame before it lands and actually takes over and has me operate from that place, from that shame base. So shame has no power here. Begone shame. And ultimately, as a way to acknowledge the work I've done, I can recognize it for some of the folks in relationships that I have with people I deeply care about. It's not me rescuing them. It's me maybe supporting them and having them understand the dynamic that they possibly went through when they were younger as well.